You think extraordinary people withdraw from society because they're arrogant or antisocial. Maslow discovered something far more unsettling in his research on self-actualized individuals. He found that those who'd reached the highest levels of psychological development weren't choosing isolation out of superiority. They were being forced into it by something he called the loneliness of growth. These highly evolved people were disappearing from social circles, withdrawing from conventional life, while appearing perfectly functional to observers. The most disturbing part? Maslow identified a specific psychological mechanism that makes it increasingly painful for extraordinary individuals to remain embedded in ordinary social structures. It's not a choice they make consciously. It's an inevitable consequence of psychological evolution that 98% of people will never understand because they'll never experience it. And the further you develop beyond the norm, the more isolating your existence becomes. Not every withdrawal from society is healthy solitude. There's a critical difference between depressive isolation and what Maslow called the strategic retreat of the self-actualized. He observed that many people who appear antisocial are actually just developmentally stuck, using isolation to avoid the discomfort of human connection. But the pattern he documented in extraordinary individuals was completely different. These were psychologically healthy people with strong capacity for intimacy and connection who were systematically choosing less social engagement. They weren't running from people. They were protecting something precious that constant social interaction threatened to erode. They could engage beautifully when they chose to, but they chose to less and less frequently. This wasn't pathology. This was adaptation to a profound incompatibility between their internal reality and external social demands. What looks like antisocial behavior from the outside is actually self-preservation from the inside. Real self-actualized people, according to Maslow's private notes, often live on the margins of society not because they fail to integrate, but because they succeeded in individuating beyond what social structures can accommodate. In this video, I'm going to reveal the frightening reason why people who develop extraordinary consciousness, creativity, or psychological depth inevitably withdraw from conventional social participation. You'll discover the 3 specific incompatibilities that Maslow identified between self-actualized individuals and normal social functioning, and why this gap widens the more you develop. These are insights from humanistic psychology that explain why history's greatest minds, artists, and innovators so often lived as outsiders, and why that pattern isn't coincidental, it's structural. By the end, you'll understand whether your own social withdrawal is healthy development or defensive avoidance. This isn't another video romanticizing introversion or celebrating hermit life. This is humanistic psychology applied to a disturbing pattern in human development. This video is for people who've noticed themselves naturally pulling away from friendships, social obligations, and conventional participation without understanding why. If you can maintain small talk, but it drains you existentially, if you feel increasingly alien in normal social settings despite being perfectly capable of navigating them, if you started preferring solitude not from depression, but from something else you can't quite name, you're about to understand what's happening. But warning! Once you understand this pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll recognize it everywhere, in yourself, in others, in history. If you're ready to understand the psychological cost of becoming extraordinary, keep watching. Think about the last time you were in a group conversation where everyone was engaged in what felt to you like superficial content. Sports scores, celebrity gossip, complaints about mundane problems. You participated appropriately, said the right things, but internally you felt a kind of suffocation. Not judgment exactly, but a profound sense of being in the wrong room, speaking the wrong language, living in a different psychological universe than everyone around you. That feeling isn't superiority, though it's often misinterpreted as such. Maslow understood it as cognitive and emotional isolation. Your internal experience has become so different from the norm that genuine connection requires translation, and translation is exhausting. The psychological weight of this gap compounds invisibly over time. You develop a social persona that can interface with normal interaction, but it becomes increasingly divorced from your actual inner life. You're functionally bilingual, speaking the language of ordinary consciousness externally while living in expanded awareness internally. And maintaining that translation eventually becomes unsustainable. This is where the withdrawal begins, not from misanthropy, but from exhaustion. not from inability to connect, but from the recognition that most social connection available to you isn't actually connection, it's performance. And you're tired performing. Maslow's hierarchy becomes crucial for understanding this pattern at a deeper level. Most people spend their entire lives operating primarily from the first four levels: physiological needs, safety, love, and belonging, and esteem. These are deficiency needs, and they orient consciousness toward filling gaps, securing stability, gaining approval, building identity. The psychological reality of someone operating from these levels is fundamentally about scarcity, threat, and social positioning. Conversations revolve around complaining, competing, seeking validation, maintaining status, or numbing discomfort. Now, consider someone who's moved into self-actualization, the fifth level, which operates from growth motivation rather than deficiency motivation. Their consciousness is oriented toward truth, beauty, authenticity, creativity, and self-expression. They're not trying to fill gaps. They're trying to express fullness. The cognitive and emotional frameworks are so different that communication becomes structurally difficult. It's not that self-actualized people can't understand deficiency concerns. They've transcended them, which means they've integrated them. But people operating from deficiency needs literally cannot understand growth motivation. It appears frivolous, self-indulgent, or incomprehensible to them. This creates what Maslow called the communication gap of consciousness. You're speaking from a psychological framework that is invisible to most people. They interpret your behavior through their framework and consistently misunderstand you. You want to discuss ideas. They want to discuss people. You're interested in meaning. They're interested in security. You're exploring authenticity. They're managing image. Neither is wrong, but they're incompatible frequencies. Here's the foreshadowing that explains why withdrawal becomes inevitable. The higher you develop psychologically, the fewer people can meet you where you actually are. It's not a judgment, it's mathematics. If 2% of the population reaches self-actualization, that means 98% of people you encounter are operating from fundamentally different psychological motivations. The loneliness isn't optional, it's structural. And Maslow found that extraordinary individuals face a specific choice. Either maintain social connection by constantly translating yourself down to be understood, or withdraw to preserve your authentic psychological state. Most choose withdrawal, at least partially, because the alternative is a form of self-abandonment. Carl Jung studied the same pattern from a different angle and called it the inflation-deflation cycle of individuation. As you individuate, as you become more fully yourself, more psychologically whole, you naturally diverge from collective norms. The collective unconscious operates through shared symbols, values, and behaviors that create social cohesion. Individuation means developing your unique consciousness, which by definition means becoming less typical, less predictable, less comfortable for others. Jung found that his most psychologically developed patients often face social rejection, not because they were difficult, but because they become too different. Their presence made others uncomfortable because it challenged the unconscious agreements that hold social groups together. The philosopher Kierkegaard called this the crowd is untruth. He observed that consciousness development inherently isolates you because most human social organization is built on shared unconsciousness, people bonding over what they're not examining rather than what they're courageously exploring. Nietzsche documented the same phenomenon, writing extensively about how the herd instinctively attacks those who stand outside it, not from malice necessarily, but from a survival instinct that perceives difference as threat. The spiritual traditions recognize this pattern centuries earlier. Buddha left the palace. Jesus retreated to the desert. Mystics across cultures withdrew into monasteries, caves, forests, not running from the world, but creating space for consciousness that couldn't develop in conventional social immersion. The Taoist tradition speaks about the sage who appears ordinary but lives in a different reality. Hermetic philosophy describes the path of the initiate as necessarily solitary because the knowledge gained creates unbridgeable distance from those who haven't walked it. This is an elitism recorded in ancient texts. It's pattern recognition. What Maslow contributed was a psychological framework to understand why this keeps happening. His research on self-actualized individuals revealed specific characteristics that make social withdrawal almost inevitable. First, these individuals have what he called autonomy. They're psychologically independent. not needing external validation or approval to maintain their sense of self. This means they're immune to the social pressure that keeps most people conforming. Second, they have heightened perception. They see through social games, recognize patterns others miss, detect inauthenticity instantly. This makes typical social interaction feel like watching a play where everyone's acting but pretending they're not. Third, they have strong ethical sensitivity. They're deeply bothered by injustice, dishonesty, and superficiality that others barely notice. Being in environments where these are normalized becomes genuinely distressing. But here's what Maslow discovered in his later research that's even more unsettling and what his published work only hints at. There's a specific mechanism that triggers a withdrawal, and it's not what most people think. The extraordinary individual doesn't wake up one day and decide to become a hermit. What happens is more subtle and more painful. They start noticing that their presence makes others uncomfortable. When they speak authentically, rooms get quiet. When they ask deeper questions, people deflect. When they challenge assumptions, they're labeled as negative or difficult. They're not trying to be disruptive. They're just being themselves. But their natural way of being violates unspoken social contracts about how consciousness is supposed to operate in groups. Here's the incomplete information that becomes clear through this lens. Society doesn't actually want extraordinary people to participate fully. It wants them to participate partially, to contribute their gifts while hiding their full consciousness. Use your creativity, but don't question our values. Share your intelligence, but don't make us feel inadequate. Be special, but don't be too different. The extraordinary individual eventually realizes his deal is being offered, and they recognize it as another form of self-betrayal. They've spent their whole journey towards self-actualization learning to stop performing, stop people-pleasing, stop abandoning themselves for acceptance. And here's society asking them to do exactly that at a more sophisticated level. So they withdraw, not from contempt, but from self-respect. They choose authentic solitude over inauthentic connection. Maslow documented case after case of this pattern. Brilliant, warm, capable people who slowly reduce their social engagement to a small circle of similarly developed individuals or deep solitude. They weren't mentally ill. They weren't damaged. They were protecting their hard-won psychological integration from social forces that would erode it. The transformation that occurs when you stop resisting this withdrawal and allow it consciously creates profound shifts in your psychological experience and life quality. Remember that suffocation you feel in superficial conversation, that sense of being trapped in the wrong movie, that dissolves entirely when you give yourself permission to engage socially on your own terms rather than society's expectations. You stop forcing yourself to attend events that drain you. You stop maintaining friendships based on history rather than actual connection. You stop performing relatability to make others comfortable. Your anxiety about being perceived as antisocial or difficult evaporates because you're no longer measuring yourself against neurotypical social standards that were never designed for consciousness operating at your level. Maslow found that self-actualized individuals reported dramatically higher life satisfaction once they stopped fighting their natural withdrawal pattern. The quality of your connections transforms completely. Instead of dozens of surface relationships, you might have 3 deep ones. Instead of constant social stimulation, you have rich solitude punctuated by meaningful encounters. Instead of feeling lonely in crowds, you feel whole in silence. The relationships you maintain become extraordinary because they're with people who can actually meet you where you are, or with people you genuinely choose to serve without requiring understanding in return. Your creative and intellectual output often increases dramatically because you're not constantly interrupted by social obligations. You have extended time for deep focus, for following thoughts to their conclusions, for creating work that comes from your actual consciousness rather than what you think will be palatable. Your mental health stabilizes because you're no longer in constant conflict between your authentic self and social performance demands. Even your physical health often improves because the chronic stress of social performance that didn't match your internal reality was more depleting than you realized. Now here's where the pattern reveals its full architecture, and where the frightening becomes liberating if you shift your perspective. The reason extraordinary people withdraw isn't actually about other people at all. It's about protecting something that Maslow identified late in his research: the capacity for what he called peak experiences and ultimately transcendence. He found that self-actualized individuals had frequent moments of profound connection to beauty, truth, or meaning that completely transformed their perception of reality. But here's what he discovered about the conditions for these experiences. They almost never happen in conventional social settings. They require specific psychological states: openness, presence, reduced self-consciousness that ordinary social interaction actively prevents. Every small talk conversation, every social obligation, every moment spent translating yourself down for others is a moment you're not available for these consciousness-expanding experiences. The withdrawal isn't about disliking people. It's about prioritizing something more valuable to you than social belonging. You've tasted experiences of consciousness that most people never access, and you recognize that protecting the space for those experiences matters more than maintaining social normalcy. This is a frightening part that Maslow documented, but society refuses to acknowledge. Psychological development beyond a certain point becomes fundamentally incompatible with conventional social participation, not because extraordinary people are broken, but because society is structured around keeping consciousness at a particular level. The systems that organize human collective life, work culture, social norms, entertainment, even most relationships, are designed for and by people operating from deficiency needs. When you're no longer operating from deficiency, you literally don't fit. You can pretend to fit, and many extraordinary people spend years doing exactly that. But it requires fragmenting yourself, showing up partially, hiding most of what you actually are, and eventually, that becomes more painful than the loneliness of withdrawal. If you're experiencing this pull toward withdrawal, if you've been judging yourself for wanting less social engagement, if you've worried something is wrong with you because you're increasingly comfortable alone, Maslow's research offers different interpretation. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not antisocial. You're experiencing the natural consequence of psychological development in a world optimized for psychological stagnation. The loneliness is real, but it's not pathological. It's developmental. And here's the pattern Maslow noticed in his most developed subjects. After fully accepting withdrawal, after moving to the loneliness into genuine solitude, something else emerges. A different kind of connection becomes possible. Not connection based on shared unconsciousness, but connection based on shared being. You might meet someone once a year who truly sees you, and that one conversation holds more genuine intimacy than a lifetime of normal friendships. You might create work that reaches people you never meet, but who recognize themselves in it. You discover that the withdrawal from horizontal connection, peer relationships at the same consciousness level, opens you to vertical connection, communion with beauty, nature, creativity, the transcendent dimension of existence that has always been there but required silence to perceive. This doesn't erase the loneliness, but it transforms it from something that's happening to you into something you're choosing for a purpose you recognize as worthy. In the next video, I'm going to reveal what Maslow discovered about the final stage beyond self-actualization, what he called transcendence, and why it requires even deeper withdrawal from not just society, but from your own ego structure. Until then, pay attention to which social obligations drain you and which ones nourish you. Your consciousness is already trying to show you where authentic connection exists and where you're just performing. Subscribe if you want to understand the complete psychology of extraordinary consciousness that society never explains.